Alrighty, it's finally time to assemble the hellebores. Now, I'm going to be doing the leaf stems first, and if you look at the PDF, you'll see that there are two different sizes of leaf stems. One leaf stem is going to be made with the B and C leaves, and then the other one is going to be made with the C and D leaves. So I'm going to be showing the B and C one on camera here, but it's the same process with the C and D smaller size leaf branch. It's just with smaller leaves. So we're going to start with the leaves. I've got, for one little leaf stem, I need 3B and 4C leaves, and I need two 16 gauge stem wires, some brown embroidery floss, and then some floral tape. I'm just going to use green floral tape because it was right here on my table. As long as you're flossing and you floss well enough, you're going to cover up that floral tape, so it's not a huge deal if your floral tape and your floss don't always match. All right, now the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to wrap all of the little stem wires on our leaves with floral tape. This is just going to help to smooth it out so that when we floss, we get a smoother finish on it. Okay, so what I've done here is I've gotten this long length of floral tape. I cut it off of my little roll, and then I cut it in half to make really skinny tape. When you cut the tape skinny like that, it just makes a little bit less bulk on your stems while still giving you a little bit of extra grip and allowing you to cover over those little ridges in the twists in your bottom wire. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to stretch the end of the floral tape. That's what activates the stickiness of it. And then we need to kind of lay it across right there at that bottom wire, right below the beads, and then wrap it around the side and try and stick it to itself. Some floral tape is kind of a stinker and doesn't want to stick. It doesn't want to stay down. So what I usually do is just kind of squeeze right here at the top while spinning my little plant, or my little leaf. See, mine came off there. Sometimes you have to flip it over to the other side of the floral tape. Sometimes one side is a little bit stickier than the other. So mine didn't stick there, so I'm going to try again. So I'm going to wrap it around, stick it to itself on the other side. And sometimes it's also because you have stickies already on your fingers. So if you keep like a little wet wipe nearby and kind of wipe off your fingers every once in a while, the stickiness from the floral tape can get stuck to your fingers, and then it tries to stick to your fingers more than this wire or itself. It's made to stick to itself. So if you have any stickies on your finger, it might confuse the floral tape. So squeeze there right at the top while spinning, and now it's finally stuck down. So now I'm going to continue it down my stem. I don't need to wrap all the way down, just a little ways there to cover up those little twisted wires. So I'm going to angle downward. I'm going to stretch my tape and then spin and stretch the tape and spin, stretch and spin all the way down to the bottom, or just a little ways below the leaf there. I went down about an inch there is all you really need to do. Okay, so you'll do that to all of your leaves except for the E and F. You don't need to do it to those ones. Okay. Next thing we're going to do is to prep the stem wires, and we're also going to do that by wrapping with floral tape. That just makes it a little less slippery so that when you're assembling, your little pieces are less likely to slide around on your stem wire. I'm just going to use full width floral tape for that. It's still attached to my spool. So same process here. We're going to stretch the end of the floral tape, and then I lay it at an angle right at the tip of my stem, kind of where it's sticking up a little bit above the stem. Wrap it around it and stick it to itself on the other side. And then I'm going to fold down this little top piece there. All right, and then I should be able to spin. I usually, again, I kind of squeeze and roll right there at the top. And then angle downward so that you can move down the stem without too much overlap. You do want it to overlap just slightly because floral tape sticks to itself. So you do want a slight bit of overlap there, but you don't want, you do want an angle so that it moves continuously down and you're not getting a really thick wrap. So stretch your floral tape and spin, stretch and spin, stretch and spin, always down at an angle. If you don't stretch the floral tape, it's not going to stick, so you do have to stretch it. And we're going to go all the way down to the bottom of the stem. I'm actually going to cut my stems because I don't need them that long, and then they'll fit on screen a little bit better. Okay, so you'll do that to both of the 16 gauge stem wires that we need for the leaf stems. All right, now we're going to add some embroidery floss to some of our leaves. Not all of them, but some of them. And then we're going to use the floss to assemble the stems or the leaves onto the stems. Now we need to leave, for the whole small plant that we're doing for the bead along, we need to leave 4 of the B leaves without the floss on it. And then I'm pretty sure it was also 4 of the C leaves. It's written in the PDF, so I hope I got that right. I think it's 4 of the B and 4 of the C that you need to leave without floss. But I'm just making one stem here on camera, so I'm going to be leaving my, I just need 2 B leaves for what I've got here for one stem. 2 B leaves without the floss, because those are going to go right at the end, and we're going to floss those while we're attaching it to the stem. So the other ones we need to floss with the embroidery floss first, because they're going to have a little tiny short stem separating them from the main leaf stem. Now, before you do that, especially if you just worked with floral tape, go wash your hands, because there's going to be some sticky residue on there that can make your embroidery floss get kind of yucky. So I'm going to go wash my hands, and I'll be right back. All right, so now I'm going to floss the stems on just these leaves down here. These ones are going to go at the top of my stem. So I'm going to actually cut off a few feet of embroidery floss off of the skein. I cut it off because while you're flossing, if you're working with this regular 6-strand embroidery floss, I'm just using regular DMC stuff, the strands are actually twisted together. And if you work with it while it's still attached to the skein, then you get super twists at the other end, and it makes a big tangle. Because what you have to do while you're flossing is actually untwist the floss, and while you're untwisting at the working end, it super twists at the other end. So if you keep it unattached to your little skein, then you can kind of work out those twists a little bit easier. Alright, so what we're going to do now is we're going to floss down about a 1/2 inch or so right below this leaf. Doesn't need to be exact, just eyeball somewhere about a 1/2 inch there. Now to floss, we're going to leave a small tail of the floss right up against the stem, and we're going to cover over that while we're wrapping down. That's going to secure the end. So we're going to press just a little tail there, hold it really tight right there at the top, right below the leaf. I'm going to untwist a small section of my floss so that all of my little 6 strands sit beside each other. And then I'm going to start winding right around, right there at the top. Okay, you see how my floss is kind of flattening out there instead of being rounded? That's exactly what you want. You want your floss to sit right beside each other. That way you get a smoother wrap. I'm probably using a different brown than I did for my white one in the PDF. Oh, I think I forgot to mention here, I'm actually doing the leaf stems for the red plant that I'm making. So my leaves look a little bit different than what I showed in the leaf video. So I wanted my red one to be a little bit sparkly, so I just added a little edging of sparkly greens right around the outside. Okay, so we're going to floss down to about there, right below the leaf, somewhere around 1 inch. Now to tie off the floss, I'm going to cut a little length here so I can show you a little bit easier. What we're going to do is we're going to kind of flop over to make a little loop on one side, and then pull the little end around the back and through that little loop. And that's going to just knot off that floss so it won't come undone. Now you're going to do that to all of your leaves except for the ones that go right at the ends of the stem. And we're going to be making 2 little leaf stems and then combining them together into the final finished leaf stem size. Now one of these little stems is going to have 2B and 2C, and the other stem is a little bit smaller. It's going to have 1B and 2C. Now let's start with this one. Alright, now we're going to start with the leaf B right at the tip, the one that's unflossed. And we're going to lay that right on top of the stem wire, so that the stem wire kind of meets up right there with the bottom of the leaf. And then we're going to floss down about 1/2 inch there, just like we did with the other leaves. So we're going to hold our leaf in place and then also pinch and hold the little tail of the embroidery floss in place. Unwrap your floss and then start winding around. Make sure you're getting good coverage. This is actually where it's helpful to have a different color of floral tape, because you can see where you've missed. You can go back and fix it. Right, so I'm going to untwist my floss, make sure it's flat, wrap down, and we're going to go down about that same length below this little leaf. Somewhere around there should be good. And then I'm going to add in another leaf B. And this one's going to go right over on this side. I'm going to bend my little stem wire there, just at a little bit of an angle, and then place it right here on the side of the stem. So we're going to have this little stem separating this leaf B from the main portion of the stem. Okay, I'm going to pinch and hold that in place. I think I'm going to make this just a little bit shorter. About right there. Okay. All right, then I'm going to floss and add that on. I'm going to wrap down about 1/4 of an inch here. 1/4 to 1/2 inch, just a little ways. Okay, about right there should be good. And then I'm going to add in a leaf C on this other side. So again, right there at the side. And it's very important that you not let go of your components yet, because it's not completely attached. So if you're going to have to keep holding it there. So I'm going to add in one little leaf C there on this side. And I'm going to do that same thing. Use my embroidery floss to attach that leaf. Make sure I'm getting good coverage. And I'm going to floss down just a little ways there. And then add in the last C leaf for this little half of the branch. I'm going to add this little C leaf on top. You kind of see how my stem gets gradually whiter as I'm going down. If I add another C leaf here, it's just going to get another whiter on this side. I'm going to add it on top. That'll prevent my stem wire from getting wide from side to side. Add that right on top there. You could also add it right behind. It'll be just fine. That way I get kind of a nice rounded stem rather than kind of a flat stem. I'm going to wrap down about 1 inch or so below this last leaf. Now once you're really comfortable and you feel like your leaves are very secure and that they're not going to wiggle around and fall off, you can just flip it over and then spin. But if you're going to spin, then you need to make sure that all these little stem wires that are sticking out here are not going to be starting to spin around your leaf stem, because that will create extra lumps and bumps in your stem. And we want to try to get them as smooth as possible. All right, so I've gone down, it's not quite 1 inch there, a little bit less than 1 inch. And then we're going to tie the floss the same way that we did before, by looping over and then pulling the end through the loop. Okay, so there's 1/2 of my little leaf branch. You don't need to cover over this with floral tape. We're going to do that later, so you can just leave it as is for now. Okay, now let's look at the other half of the leaf branch. I just assembled that one off camera because it's exactly the same process, just with fewer leaves. We'll have that one B that was unflossed right there at the end of the stem, floss down about 1/2 inch, and then add in one C, floss down a little ways, and then add in the other C, and then you'll floss down about 1/2 inch or 1 inch or so below this last leaf. Okay, now we're going to take both of these leaf stems and combine them. Now, what you could do is leave your floss attached when you assemble the second one and then use that same floss to attach them together. I didn't this time, but you definitely can do that. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to put these leaf stems together. There's a front side and a back side. You'll notice all of the fronts of the leaves should be facing forward, and then on the backs of the leaves should be on the back. You can see all my little lacing wires there. That's the back side. We're going to put the front sides together like this. Okay, and then we're going to floss down at least 1 inch below these leaves, 1 to 2 inches right here below these leaves. So I'm going to add in a separate floss, but again, you can leave your floss attached to one of your leaf stems and then just use that same floss to attach them together. So I'm going to start right about where those little floss ends meet. You do want to match up the ends of your floss together right there at the joint. And then I'm just going to wrap down using a new thing of floss. Now, if you have a really hard time getting your floss to attach these little leaf stems together, you can attach them together with floral tape first and then floss over it if you need to. If that helps you to hold it a little bit easier while you're flossing. And once they're pretty well combined, I can just flip it and spin it, and that'll help it go a little bit faster. And again, I'm checking all these little leaf stems, making sure that they're not spinning around and twisting around my leaf stem or around each other. Try to keep them as flat as possible so you get a tidier looking stem. Okay, I'm going to stop about right there. I would recommend, if you're doing the full potted plant here, I would recommend doing a different length for each of the leaf stems that you do. That way you get a little bit of variation in the height and it'll look like a little bit more natural plant. So again, I'm going to tie off my floss the same way that I did before, just by looping around and pulling through the loop. Cut that short. And this time I am going to cover over this bottom here with floral tape. That way when I shove this down into my clay or my foam or whatever I'm using to pot, all these little things will be underneath the floral tape, so it won't shove it up above the foam or the clay. So we're going to just cover over that. Floss down a little ways, or not floss, floral tape down a little ways. Okay. I'm going to trim my little wires to be, you want below your floss, you want to be the depth of your pot plus a couple of inches there. So I don't know exactly which pot I'm putting my red ones in yet, but I'm just going to cut those 2 stem wires there. Now to finish off our little leaf stem, we're going to do some little shaping here. So I'm going to reach inside and kind of spread them apart. So you end up with a little leaf stem that looks like this. You can do some shaping of your leaves now if you want to, or you can wait until after you assemble. It's not a big deal. Okay, so there's one little leaf stem. This is the larger size with the B and C leaves. You'll make 2 of them in this size. Okay, now we're ready to assemble the buds. Now again, I'm going to be showing on screen the components that I've made for my red plant that I'm still working on, haven't finished yet. My red plant I thought would look better with brown stems on the flowers, but my white ones had this kind of an olivey green one is what I used for the bead along. For my book, the original pattern actually used a light brown too, but either way is going to be fine. Alright, so I've got a 16 gauge stem wire. I've already prepped it by wrapping it with floral tape. If you happen to already have 18 gauge stem wire on hand, you could use that instead for the buds. It'll give you a slightly thinner stem. First thing we're going to do is we're going to flip the buds over so they're face down. The back should be pointed up towards you. And then we're going to bend those little top wires back 90 degrees. So we're going to do that to all of our little bud sepals. You should have 3 for each bud. And we're going to arrange them so all those little top wires kind of meet in the middle, like that. Okay, now we need to twist all these little top wires together. And what I usually hold it in my hand, but you could pinch them down against a table if you need to. It's important that we keep all of the little tops as close together as possible while we're twisting, because otherwise you end up with a little bit of a gap there. You might have a little bit of a gap there anyways, but just trying to keep those really close together is going to help to minimize or even eliminate that gap. Now what I do is I kind of pinch it and hold it in my hands. I put my thumb right underneath where I want them to meet together, and then just kind of pinch and hold all the little sepals together with my fingers. Okay, so I've got all these little stem wires there. I'm going to start it off by hand twisting it, and I'm going to switch to my little pliers and twist the rest of the way up. What I do to try to make sure that my little tops are pulled tightly together is sometimes I'll just kind of give a little tight twist right there at the top. You just want to be careful that you don't break your wires. All right. So I've got those little top wires twisted together. I'm going to clip them a little bit shorter there just to make sure that they're going to fit inside my bud so they don't show in the finished piece. Now what we're going to do, you see how all my little tops there are nice and tight and close together. We're going to fold these down around those twisted top wires. Now you might need to kind of bend your little sepals a little bit so they kind of bow out just slightly. I'm going to do that to all of my little sepals there. And then we're going to fold them down so their bottom wires kind of gather together. I'm going to take a minute. I'm going to spend some time shaping and pinching together, make sure that they're nice and tight and close together. All right. Now I need my 16 gauge stem wire, and I also need just a little bit of some kind of 30 gauge wire. I'm just going to cut that off of my little spool there. I'm going to be using this wire to attach it to the stem. You could use floss if you wanted to, but because we have these little twists here at the bottom of our bud, those might show a little bit if you just floss over that. Some people do specifically leave their little bottom wires untwisted just so that they can floss without having to cover a whole lot there. So that's definitely an option there for you, is to use floss there if instead of wire and then floral tape and then floss. You'll get a little bit thinner stem, but it's not a big deal to me, so I'm just going to do this. Alright, so I'm going to put that little 16 gauge stem wire kind of right beside the bud there. Pinch and hold that in place. Then we're going to use this little 30 gauge wire just like we did the floss. Just leave a little tail sticking down, pinch and hold it in place. And then we're going to use this little wire to bind the little bud right to the end of the stem wire. I don't need to wrap down very far because this isn't a very heavy component, so it's not going to need a whole lot of effort to attach it. But to tie off my little assembly wire, I'm going to pull out one of these little individual stem wires and then just wrap around it once or twice. Fold it back down, and then I can cut it off. And that will hold the little end of my assembly wire so it doesn't come undone. I'm going to cover over this. First I'm going to trim these so that they're different lengths here. Make sure that they don't all end at the same spot. And then I'm going to use just a half width floral tape here to cover over this. Alright, so I'm going to cover over all the way down to where the bottom of that wire is. Remember, I kind of spun around a little bit there. I can see that underneath my floral tape, so I'm just going to kind of push it back over to try and straighten that out. You can sometimes do that even if you've already covered with floral tape. Alright, next step is to floss, and we're going to add the leaves in with the floss. So I'm going to cut a little bit of embroidery floss off my skein. Make sure I don't have any stickies from the floral tape on my hands. And we're going to start flossing right below the bud here. And just the same way we did with the leaves. So we're just going to leave a little tail, start right there below the bud, make sure I'm covering over all of my floral tape. Flatten out my thread and then wrap. And we're going to wrap down probably about an inch or so right below this bud. It doesn't need to be the exact same for every flower. You can add these leaves in different spots if you need to, but they're usually somewhere close up top. So I'm going to wrap down somewhere around there. And then I'm going to add in one of my leaves. You can use E or F. It turned out just fine either way I did it. So I'm just going to grab one of these. I'm going to press it against the stem. Notice I do not have floral tape on here just because it makes it a little bit too bulky. But I do have twists here. It might show a little bit of my finished flower, but those twists, the reason why I twist there is because it adds extra grip. It adds something for your assembly wires or for your embroidery floss to grab onto, so it's less likely to just be yanked and pulled off of your flower. If you don't have those twists there, it's really smooth and you can easily just pull a piece out, and that's why I have those twists in the first place. So, alright, so I'm going to intentionally make my thread go around these little working wire tie-offs right below my little leaf there. That's going to help me to grab right onto that leaf. Wrap over. I might need to wrap over it twice there. Just be really careful that you don't get extra bulky, just to help cover those wires. Right, and then I'm just going to continue wrapping down. And I don't need to wrap down very far, maybe a ½ inch or so. Well, less than that. I'm just going to go right about there. I think that actually is about ½ an inch. And then I'm going to add my leaf on one of the other sides. I don't want to add it on the same side as the previous leaf, but you can go any of the other sides. And I'm going to go right here on front, just so that I get a nice rounded stem rather than... Nah, I'm going to go right there. Okay, just kidding. I'm going to go on this side, and again, I'm going to try and get that floss right there in that little wire coil to help hold my leaf. I do have a little bit of wire showing there, but I just decided that I'm okay with that because it helps to grip my little leaf there. And then we're going to go down. Now we're going to floss down to the point where this little bud stem is going to attach to the other flower. So you only need to go kind of a couple inches here below this last leaf. And once those leaves are really secure, you can just flip it over and spin, and that'll make it go just a little bit faster. So untwist the floss, make sure, sometimes it kind of doesn't untwist evenly and you get kind of like a weird, one of the little threads looks longer than the other one. So sometimes you kind of have to pull it at different angles to try and get those flosses to be even. That way they sit right beside each other and you don't get any weird little lumps. Now another way you can do this if you want a little bit smoother stem is actually to divide this thread. This has 6 strands in it. You could divide it into 3 strands. It does take a little bit longer to floss when you do it that way, but usually you do get a smoother finish with that when you do it that way. So you see how my floss is kind of getting a little bit weird there. I'm gonna try and move that down a little bit to get it out of the way so it doesn't cause problems. Okay, that should be plenty of space there below my bud. You can even go a little bit shorter. Again, when you're making a full pot of these, I do recommend doing different lengths so that you have a little bit more variety in your finished plant. And I'm going to tie off this little end of my floss the same way that I did before. Okay, and there I have a little bud ready. And now we can go look at the flowers and then we'll join this together. To start the flower assembly, we're going to have to put the flower center together. Now what I've got here on screen are some weird colored ones just so you can see a little bit better what I'm doing here on screen. You should have 1 pistil, 1 nectary, 2 stamen A, and 1 stamen B for each flower. We're going to start with the pistil. Mine is in green here. Yours should be this kind of a ivory or light yellow or even maybe even white there in the center of your flower. And then we're going to add in 1 stamen B. That should be the one that's shorter. And we're going to take the little stem wire of the pistil and put it right through the hole right in the center of the stamen. Just insert that through there. Make sure both of the little wires from the pistil go through the same hole right in the middle. I'm try and shift this around a little bit. Make sure that it's nicely centered there. Sometimes things aren't perfectly symmetrical with the little stem wires, so it can be a little bit tricky to kind of get them together. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing with both of these stamen A's. What I find helps is if you kind of straighten out all these little bottom wires, because now all 4 of these little wires have to go through the hole in the middle of stamen A. Okay, make sure all your little wires get through there. Okay, and we've got 1 more little stamen A to do. So again, I'm going to straighten out all my little wires, kind of pinch right there and trying to squeeze them all together so they stay closer together while I'm shoving them through. Now I've got 6 wires that I've got to go through the second stamen A. Alright, now we've got that, and now we need to add the nectaries last. And luckily the nectaries have a fairly large hole, because we've got little 8 wires that need to go through there. Okay. Alright, so I'm going to push them really tight and close together. And then I'm going to twist these little stem wires together. You can use pliers if you need to. I'm just going to use my fingers because that's what I'm used to doing. Twist these together. I'm going to try and get a smooth twist here because any lumps here in these twists is going to show on your finished flower. Now what I'm going to do, you see how they kind of got all messed up and bunched up together? What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and kind of straighten them out a little bit. Make sure that the previous layer isn't kind of coming down below the little stamens in the layer that's supposed to be underneath it. So I'm going to try and pull out the bottom layer stamen so that they're below where they're supposed to be. That way they don't kind of cross over into the other layer. It just makes it look a little bit more messy when that happens. Okay. And I'm going to check and make sure that the little shorter stamen Bs are also not kind of crossing down lower below the stamen A, the longer ones. Okay, so there's my flower center. Now for my red one looks like this. I used gold instead of the little yellow beads, but the other colors are the same as my white one. So I've got that ivory color in the center, I've got my little gold stamens, and then I have my little green nectaries right below. Okay, so you should have one of these for each of your flowers. All right, now let's get this flower put together. I've got here one of my finished flower centers. I have 5 sepals of the same size. The assembly process is the same whether you're doing a small or large flower. Just make sure that your sizes match here. I'm going to be doing a small one here on camera. I've got 2 leaf E, but again, you could use 1 F and 1 E, not a big deal. I've got some 30 gauge wire, some floral tape, my embroidery floss, and then a finished bud. And I've also got a 16 gauge stem wire that's been already prepared by wrapping with floral tape. All right, first things first is we're going to attach the little flower center to the end of the stem. I'm going to cut off a few feet of 30 gauge wire. We're going to use the same 30 gauge wire to attach the flower center and all of the little sepals. So a few feet there will give you a nice long length to be able to attach them all. Now, I am going to leave my little wires here bare. I'm not going to wrap them with floral tape, but if you need to, if you find that any of your pieces you're having a hard time getting them to stay in place, they're wiggling around too much, if you add a little layer of that floral tape, just like we did with the leaves, kind of cut the floral tape in half and wrap their little stems, it gives you a little bit more grip. It does add a little bit more bulk to your stems, which is why I'm going to try and do it without first. But especially if you don't have a whole lot of experience assembling flowers, adding that little layer of floral tape there can really help you to hold your pieces still. So that's one extra little thing that you can add on if you're having trouble during assembly. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the stamen, or the little flower center, right at the end of the stem. Do you see how the, you might not be able to because it's white, but you see how that little twisted stem is kind of off-center? I'm going to put the 16 gauge stem wire so it's directly in the center, and then that's kind of off to the side. That's going to help to make sure that my little flower stem is kind of centered on my stem wire. It's going to improve the look of my flower. I'm going to use this little 30 gauge wire, leave a little tail, press it against the stem, right there, right below where I'm holding my little flower center. And I'm going to wind this just a few times there right at the end. Now, if you can, if there's a little space there, right in the bottom of those nectaries, there's kind of like a little gap. If you can shove your 16 gauge stem wire up into that little hole there as far as you can, that just makes it a little bit easier to attach, because then you're not wrapping right at the very end of the 16 gauge stem wire. You're kind of wrapping a little bit below, so it's easier to catch and hold on to that. So if you can push that 16 gauge stem wire up into the flower center, you'll have a little bit easier time getting it to attach. All right, so I've wound just a few times there with my assembly wire, and I've very specifically kept my wire up high. I don't want my wire to wrap down my stem wire yet, because I'm going to use this same wire to attach all of my little sepals. And I don't want a large gap to end up between the bottom of my flower center and any of my petals. I'm going to use that same principle while I'm assembling all of my sepals. So I want to keep my assembly wire high, just wind a few times. Now, winding a few times is not going to hold everything still. The pieces are not going to be still until you wind it further down. So what I generally do is try to make sure that I'm holding everything while I'm assembling. I don't really let go. Sometimes I'll just lift up a finger just slightly, just carefully and quickly to try and shove another sepal in there, but I'm technically not really letting go of anything. I'm still holding it in place with my hands. Now I'm going to try to add in 2 sepals at a time here. If you have a hard time with 2 sepals at a time, you can do just 1 at a time. But I'm going to try and do 2 at a time, because then I have fewer passes with my wire and less bulk. And these are small enough that you might be able to do that. So try with 2. If you can't manage the 2, then just go back to just adding 1 at a time. So I'm going to add in 2 of my little sepals. I'm going to push them right up against the bottom of my flower center. And make sure that the top side of your little sepals is facing upward, and then the undersides are going to be facing downward. That way all of our lacing wires and all these little wire wraps are going to be not showing in our finished flower. So I'm going to hold those with my finger really tightly, and then I'm going to wind with the assembly wire. I'm going to try and catch right around where those little tie-offs for our working wire is. Try and get my wire to catch right around there because that's going to give me a little bit extra grip there. Alright, so I just wound about 3 times there. Now if I let go and kind of shake these things, they're probably not going to be completely secure just yet. They should be pretty good. So if I let go, okay, these ones are pretty good. I did a pretty good job on those ones, but just keep holding in case things are a little bit wiggly still. Then I'm going to add in 2 more sepals, and I'm going kind of around the flower center here. So I'm going to add in 2 more little sepals. Lift up my little finger, add them in there, hold everything nice and tight. Make sure that my sepals are not down too far, because then there's going to be kind of a vertical gap between the little components in my flower. Hold that really tight, make sure I'm also really close against the stem wire. And then I'm going to wrap a few times there. Again, I'm going to keep my assembly wire really high, right up underneath my flower. I've got 1 little sepal left. I'm going to move over here to my little gap where that last sepal goes. Again, I'm not really letting go of everything. I'm trying to keep a nice hold on everything. And then I'm going to wind a few more times there to grip the top of that little petal. And then now it's time, now that I've added in all my pieces, now I can take my assembly wire down further. So I'm going to wind down the stem. I'm going to make sure that all of my little stem wires are nice and straight and they're not wrapping and twisting and curling around each other. But I'm still kind of holding on here. Wind down about 1 inch or so below the flower. Now at this point, once you've wound down, your sepals should be really secure. If they weren't before when you did the little winds right here at the top, if they weren't secure then, they should be secure now. If they are not, you need to undo your assembly and redo it. If you're really, really struggling, add that layer of floral tape there. It will give you extra bulk, but it'll also give you extra grip. Alright, now I'm going to tie off that assembly wire the same way as I did with the bud. I'm just going to lift up one of these little individual wires and wind around a couple times. Push it back down, and then I can cut off. Alright, now all these little wires here, I'm going to make sure that they're different lengths. I don't want them all ending in the same spot. That's going to help so that my flower stem kind of tapers down in width slowly over time rather than all ending at the same spot. And then you get like this one little spot where it's really thick and then directly below it it's really skinny. So slowly taper down there. Now I'm going to cover this with floral tape. That's going to help to smooth out my stem. It's also going to cover up all the little grooves so that when I floss, my floss won't show all those little grooves. So let me show you real quick before I move on what the front of my little flower here looks like. So they should be pretty evenly distributed. You should be able to kind of move them sideways a little bit to kind of shift them around, but it should look something like this. Okay, now I'm going to use half-width tape to cover up here just because it adds a little bit less bulk while still covering everything up. And usually starting right there below the flower is kind of difficult to do. It might take a few passes with this floral tape, kind of holding it in place, making sure it doesn't go before you let go and then start wrapping down. So even now it's kind of slipping down a little bit here. It should secure a little bit better once you get a little bit lower below the flower. So if you can kind of hold it in place there at the top while you're doing the top, and then as you wrap down it should kind of stop slipping eventually. I'm just going to wrap down to the bottom of where those little wires are, and again I'm checking to make sure that all my little wires are not kind of twisting and spinning around the stem. That's going to create some unpleasant little lumps on your stem. Now I've still got some wires here that are kind of digging through my floral tape. I think I'm going to wrap over this again. It is going to add extra bulk, but I'm okay with that. So I'm just going to cover up these little wire coils one more time. Okay, I don't want those to show through my floss. I'm going to cut several feet of my embroidery floss off of my little skein there. Just like the bud, we're going to start right below the little flower and then wrap down. So I'm going to pinch a little tail of my floss right there at the top, right there below the flower, and untwist my floss and then start wrapping down. I'm going to hold that tail of floss for a little while because it's not completely secure yet. Be very careful wrapping down the bottom of this flower, especially because it's thicker at the top and then it kind of slowly tapers down a little bit. Sometimes it can be a little bit hard to wrap down those little slopes, so be careful that your little floss isn't slipping down. If you kind of pull tightly on your floss while you're doing it, it kind of helps a little bit. So I'm going to floss down a couple inches here below my flower before I add in my first leaf. You can kind of see little gaps of green between where my floss is going, so that kind of helps me to make sure that I'm getting full coverage, so I can lift that back up and reposition that floss to cover all the green. And every once in a while I'm flossing, I kind of run my fingers along it there just to try to move out all the little twists. Because while I'm untwisting at the front, it super twists at the end. So sometimes you just have to stop and kind of work out all those little twists. I'm going to floss down probably about 2 inches below the flower head here. 1.5, 2 inches, somewhere around there. It doesn't need to be exact. These are flowers. There is variety in the way that they grow. So I'm going to go about right there, and then I'm going to add in my first leaf. You could use an E or an F here. It's not a big deal. They're both going to look just fine. So I'm going to add in one of those little leaves, just like we did for the bud. I'm going to stop and trim my stem here because it's kind of getting in the way of trying to be on camera. Okay. So I'm going to floss down below this leaf about 1 inch, and then I'm going to add in my bud. Okay, so somewhere around there. I very rarely measure any of these little distances. I just kind of eyeball it, but that's somewhere around 1 inch there. Then I'm going to add in one of my little finished buds. So you can add this on either side. It's not a big deal. So I'm going to put my bud about right there. This one's the same height as my little flower. You can make it a little bit shorter. I don't know if I'd make it a little bit longer, but you could make it a little bit shorter if you needed to. Add a variety to your little plants. Makes them look a little bit more natural. Alright, so then I'm just going to continue using that floss to attach them together. I'm just going to wind a couple of times here, and then I'm going to add in my second leaf E, kind of right there, right below that little joint where those little flowers come together. Alright, and then I'm going to continue flossing down to the point where I want my stems to meet my, my little pot. This is also something that you want to add a little bit of variety to. I put some general measurements in the PDF. Somewhere between like 2 to 4 or 5 inches there, right below those last leaves. That'll give you a little bit of variety to all your little plants so that they're slightly different heights. Okay. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to pretend that I don't have enough floss because I want to show you guys how I add in a new piece of floss here. So I just cut that short here, and let's say I don't have enough floss to finish out my stem. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in, got to hold that floss so it doesn't come undone. Then I'm going to add in my new floss so it's pointing down right there below that last little thing of the old floss. I'm going to take the old floss and wrap around that new floss once, and then I'm going to pull down that tail wire, or not wire, tail floss right down there kind of with the new tail, and then I take the new floss and continue wrapping. And you want to make sure that you're going the same direction when you do this. And then you should be able to wrap over both with the new floss. Sometimes you get a little bit of a little bump there, but I'm usually okay with that. Sometimes it's really clean, and sometimes there's a little tiny bit of a bump there. And then you just floss down with the new length of floss. And again, you want to make sure, my little stem wires here are trying to twist around each other. So every single time that I'm kind of spinning these, I'm trying to re-straighten also those little stem wires. Okay, so I've gone down maybe 3 inches there below the little joint in my flowers, and I'm just going to tie off my floss. Okay, cut that short. And then I'm going to cover with floral tape, just like I did at the bottom of the leaf stems. Okay, and then I'm going to trim my little stem wires here to just a couple inches below my pot. I don't know exactly what pot I'm using, so I'm going to leave a little extra length there. Oops. Now what I'm going to do here before I'm done, I'm going to bend these little stems. Usually hellebores, they don't normally point straight up when they're planted. They usually either go forward or they nod a little bit. So I'm going to add a little bend in my stem there. And I'm going to do the same thing over here with the bud. I don't really want it to have perfectly straight stem. Just kind of give it a little bit of shaping there. And now my little stem is finished. Now, some of my plants, some of my little flowers did not have a little bud on there. So let me show you my little white ones here. So here's another small one with a bud here of my white stems. And then I had some, there's going to be at least a couple flowers. We're making 5 flowers total. There's only 3 buds. There's going to be some flowers that don't have buds on them. So this one is an example of a large flower. And this one didn't have a bud. So there's going to be kind of a mix there. And what we're going to do with these little flowers here, I'm going to add a little bit of shaping now. You can do this after you pot them if you prefer. I'm just going to add a little bit of shaping now. Most of them, you can see I've kind of curled them up so the tops come in on most of my little sepals here. I'm going to make some that kind of fold down instead of up at the top. That's just going to give me a little bit more movement so that they're not all perfectly exactly shaped exactly the same way. Just gives a little bit more of a natural feel. As in nature, plants don't all their little petals aren't going to be shaped exactly perfectly the same like little cookie cutters. So put a little variety there, and maybe you can even make some flowers where all the little sepals bend back, and some where they all kind of cup inward around the little flower center. So add a variety. Just like we have variety of lengths, we want a little bit of variety in our shaping as well.